Welcome to another episode of Inspired Content, where I take a look at books, games, movies, and more, and review them, and then come up with ideas inspired by them that we can use to create new content. And I'll be looking at creative prompts inspired by the game Continuo today, and I did the review of it earlier last week, I guess. I'm a little late on getting to the second half of this video, but let's jump into the ideas that this inspired. So the very first idea I had for something to do with this is, right now, each of these individual tiles is one-sided with these lines of color on them, usually 3 or 1 or something to that effect. And there's a part of me that would like to see that format done with like dragons. Like, how long a dragon can you build? Or maybe snakes. I mean, but I like the idea of building a long dragon, and you'd have to change the mechanic a little bit, because with something like the individual paths here, the green pieces here, that may be the end of the dragon at one of those points, or it may be the middle of a dragon if you did that. So in order to do the gameplay in such a way that you build a dragon of incredible length, what you're going to end up having to do is set it up so that you have a head card and a tail card, and you have to put end caps on your dragon length. And so you don't get to count your dragon until you've put a head and tail on it. So you're looking to build the biggest dragon out of however many tiles you have the chance to use, and you don't get to count it until you put a cap on it. And that leaves the possibility of something along the lines of another player actually putting something in the way and interrupting your ability to extend your dragon any further. So it can really make for a different twist on the game here. It's not just a reskin. It's not like putting a different set of colors or something like that. So that's idea number 1. Idea number 2 is Celtic knots. That one also has a tendency to be something. You may be able to do a knot that has 2 loose ends at the end of it, but I feel like that should count as half as much as if you were to connect the ends with an end loop. So like a Celtic knot is something that has the additional potential in the fact that they don't have to be straight lines. You can have 2 lines curling this way and 1 curling off that way, and so you have the ability to do other shapes than linear pieces. And the only way to do that sometimes is to have a piece, like a corner piece with something, say, like this piece down here, forcing the direction of another turn. It'll be a little more tricky to figure out how to get them to fit in interrupted patterns onto a tile, but I think for the amount of work it would take to solve that, it would still be goodness gracious. It would still be a good gaming difference in this game. It's not just a reskin. It's a way to change up the gameplay and the mechanisms you can use in those gameplays. You might also change up the tiles so that they're not an even number on each side, but an odd number, like 3 or 5, which could lead to a very different sort of result in gameplay, especially when you're stacking them alongside each other. You don't necessarily have to do corner to corner. You can do corner to middle. And when you do that, having an odd number lets you get a twisting, almost fractal-like pattern that you could end up with. So that's idea number 2. Number 3 is changing up something about the actual tiles themselves. I'm curious to see. It would probably take a lot of extra work to do it, but I'm very kind of curious to see if we could do this with hexagonal tiles. And we could also try like a triangular tile too. Triangular tiles, I think, would probably be something that easier to encounter in a gameplay. The hexagonal tile, to making a hexagonal grid, has some of the tricks of a square or a rectangle, but also some of the tricks of triangles. Triangles means that you usually split off in 3 directions. You have 3 sides, and those are your, or 3 corners, depending on how you do it, but those are your directions for that. A hexagon sort of does sort of like you can have 3 going off in the Y shape, but you're also going to have the inverted Y shape that you can do 3 different directions on that. And that's just the nature of the hexagon. They deviate along this because this line across the middle to the adjacent and vertical line forms a very nice square graph paper kind of grid. Whereas a hexagon, it doesn't work that way. Hexagons and triangles, when you grid them, I guess it depends on your triangle. If you do an isosceles or a equilateral or right angle, right triangle, you still have to face the fact that when you're doing a formation that's 3 directions, you're not going to get an even square grid. Like the closest you're going to be able to pull to a square grid is if you have you have isosceles triangles with a wide base like this, and you can fit 4 of them to form a square. You're going to be able to get a diamond path through the middles of each one, but each middle of this will still have a path off of it to the adjacent bottom piece down through that one. And so it's going to have like a connection through here, but that's as close as you're going to get to rectangular shaped pathways. And I like the fact that takes a different type of thinking to play. A square grid is really just doing straight lines, right angles, and you know if something's connected to this one, it's off on this side or this side. There's no diagonally, side to point arrangement going on there. And it's a very simple way. We're used to thinking that way. Walls, doors, windows, they're all square with access points that make sense on a certain grid formation. The hexagon and triangle grids, they're a trip to try to figure out how to set them up right. Like even sometimes just trying to visualize what would hexagons look like in a grid formation. I think there are a couple ways you can do that. And they don't always make a lot of sense intuitively to us because we're not used to thinking in that format. So that's number 3. And that was a bit of a ramble. I apologize. Number 4 is... this one's a little complicated to try to describe. Is in this, as near as I can tell going through this, we have red, green, blue, yellow, and that's it. So we have 4 color combinations. Now, it occurs to me that there are ways to do this, and one of the things that first came to my mind was, stupid as it is, Captain Planet from way back when had the elements: earth, air, fire, water, and heart. So you have 5. Again, deviating from the 4x4 grid and getting you an odd number changes up a little bit of the gameplay, but also having those 5 things, you can build a map by stacking those tiles to build long chains of a certain element. And if you had a playing piece that you could move along paths, the possibility here for my idea was that you could take these tiles, build these paths. So say you had a earth element powered player piece, and you built a path of earth that you could travel along easily. But you have 4 other elements to play with. And when you look at a 5-section grid formation, the example of the elements when you do them in a 5-point configuration like that is often equated to a rock paper scissors style kind of game. There was I've heard of a game that was done by Big Bang Theory, I think it was, where they had a game that was rock paper scissors lizard Spock, so they could have 5 elements, and that allowed at any given time that one element could beat 1 or 2 of the others, but be beaten by other ones, and it's not always a direct cross correlation. So being able to have 5 means that, you know, one element beats this one beats that one, but these 2 are neutral to this one. And so you have 3 grades of terrain at this point on this design that I'm talking about. You'll have your terrain, you'll have neutral terrain, and then you'll have hostile terrain. And even further subdividing it, you'll have terrain that you're hostile to and can beat or conquer. So water can conquer fire. And you'll have terrain that's hostile to you, so obstructionary. So if you're playing fire and water conquers fire, if your line that you're traveling on hits a wall of water, you cannot pass it. But if you're playing water and you come to a wall of fire, because you can beat it, you can go right through it. And if you're water and you encounter earth and heart or whatever, they're relatively neutral to you, so you can walk on them, you can move across them maybe 1 square at a time, whereas on your own element you can run the whole path in one go. And so building a longer path makes more sense. And it's like, this idea has some real potential. It has some work. You have to do a little bit of work on the mechanics of it to get it figured out, but I really think that's a doable game. And that was number 4, and that was also a bit of a ramble. But number 5 is, I feel like the possibility of using these as dominoes would be fascinating in gameplay. So you would have a domino that is essentially like that. And you could use that, you build your next domino off of that, trying to build a long chain, playing domino-like games, but instead of using numbers to match with a parallel number of dots or pips or whatever, it's these patterns forming pathways that you can continue. And that would be really a really hard game, but it would also mean that each one of these tiles is a different pattern in this set. And so each one of these is a different pattern. So if you take them, there are 46 of these tiles in here that's different. You have 46 that this one tile could be paired with 45 other tiles at the end of it. And then after that, you've got an absolute boatload of tiles that you could use for your dominoes. And so you just have this huge inventory of potential tiles or domino pieces that you could play with. I feel like there's got to be a way to slim down the number, because it might be too many, honestly, at that point. But I'd be willing to give it a try at some point and just see if I could chart out. I might trim this down to a 3x3 rather than a 4x4 and see if that helps. Or maybe just a 2x2 might be all that you need. And it would slim the numbers down enough that you could get some varied gameplay. without overcomplicating it too much. All right, and then number 6. This is sort of something I grazed when I was talking about the rock, paper, scissors approach to this game, is making chutes and ladders. Again, having a piece that can move along the paths that you build, and having the map, any terrain that's not your color, be something that you can move one, or like if you roll a die and you move the number of squares that you have available to you, but if you're on your own color, you can travel the whole length of the path in either direction. So if you're walking across the board on green, you're a blue piece, and you come to the middle of a green line, a blue line, and you land on it, it's your color. You can go all the way to this end or all the way to this end, as if it's like a chutes and ladders approach. And that potentially opens up a very different type of gameplay. The biggest problem I have with that design just now is, where are you going? In a game where you build a random grid as you play, you lay a tile, they lay a tile, you get different tiles placed in a random formation, or pseudo-random, because you're trying to build long paths that you can use to travel across the board. But the question remains, where are you going and why? Like, why are you hitting that path? And like, why is it important for you to get further along to one direction on the board than another? Maybe you do something along the lines of you can only place a tile on the board if you're on an edge tile. So if you have a 2x2 grid of grid tiles, when you're on an edge piece, you can place a new tile on it. But if you're on a 5x5 and you're on one of the middle tiles, you don't get to place a tile. You don't get to dictate the shape of the board until you can get to an edge tile to place the next edge tile. It still requires, what is your goal? What is the point of victory? And that seems like, in the best case scenario, would have to be point accumulation through certain special squares on your grids, or like a draw card item, or a destination point that you're building a chain of these tiles to try to reach. So, I mean, that takes a little more figuring out where to go with the rest of that. But I think there's some potential there for that. And those are my 6 ideas inspired by this pretty simple game. Most of them complicate it a good deal more, but I think some of them are interesting games. So if you actually do a little experimentation and see what you can create with some of those ideas, I'd love to see what you make. I may dabble with a few of them myself in the near future. So thank you for joining me for this one. I will see you on the next video, probably tomorrow. Tonight is going to be Views Day night, so I'm going to be watching a few more episodes of Russian Doll, the last 4 episodes, I think. And I will be doing a discussion video on my Choose Your Own Adventure style game later tonight, too. So I will see you for some of that. Take care, and I will see you later. End video.